I took my daughter's prom photo from 2018 and I put her and her boyfriend into an old photograph of Perth Amboy from the 1950s. Here's how I did it. I hit select subject and then I copied and pasted the subject, in this case my daughter and my father, into a new document. I then created a solid color adjustment layer, and I made it a color that I didn't see a lot of in the regular picture. So in this case, I picked blue. And that's so that all the little flaws could show up. And then I started fixing those flaws. The first thing I used was the healing brush, which looks like a little Band-Aid. What it does is it picks up pixels from around the image and uses them to fill in spots that are missing. So I used that to fix her sandals. For the extra spots that shouldn't be there that came with the image, I used the magic eraser, which is actually hidden under the other eraser. If you click on the little triangle at the bottom, you'll get the magic eraser. And if you just click on areas that shouldn't be there, it'll just select them and erase them. The next thing I used after the magic eraser was just a regular eraser to pick up all the little spots that were left. So I'm just switching back and forth between the healing brush, the magic eraser, the regular eraser, just trying to fix up all the little edges and sloppy areas. Like any tool, you can adjust the width and the hardness of it. So I'm just trying to go through and select various spots and fix them. Now I'm using the quick selection tool, which is hidden in the same set as the magic wand tool. If you click on the bottom little triangle, the quick selection tool will appear. And you can use that instead of the magic wand to quickly select and cut areas that shouldn't be there. So I'm just going around and healing, fixing up the various areas. The healing brush is actually a lot like the clone stamp. They work very similarly. But now I'm just using the quick selection tool, getting areas that shouldn't be there. And you can see that the blue adjustment layer that I created underneath the figures really helps me to see everything that shouldn't be there. So I'm just going through and doing the quick selection tool and then cut to get rid of areas that shouldn't be there. I'm using the eraser. Now for my dad's hat, I tried using the healing brush, but I actually ended up using instead the clone stamp. So what you do with the clone stamp is you just go to an area and you hit the Alt key, and then it picks up the pixels from underneath that area, and then when you paint with it, it'll paint that pattern or that texture or those colors in a spot that has pixels missing. It's a good way to heal an area, and I think it's just as effective as using the healing brush. They seem kind of redundant. So that's what I'm doing now. And then I used the eraser to smooth the edge. So once I had that perfectly done, I had to go back and take a look at my old photograph. Now in this case, this was a photograph I'd taken in the basement of the public library. I'd found an old photograph there, and I took a picture with my iPhone, so you can see it's crooked. So what I'm doing is I'm selecting it and cropping it, and then I'm going to go transform and then skew. And I'm pulling out the corners so it's no longer distorted. I'm basically fixing the fact that it's a photograph of an old photograph and not a scan. So once I've done that, I apply the distortion, I deselect it, and now I'm ready to put in my daughter and my dad into the picture. I changed the pixels per square inch to 300. It's good to do that early on. If you do it later, sometimes you lose a lot of detail. So early on when I'm manipulating a photograph, I like to change the PSI. Now I've put my daughter and my dad into the picture. This is my daughter's graduation photo, but she needs to be black and white. So what I'm doing is I'm doing image and then adjustments, and then I'm going to change it to black and white. Oh, I'm also changing the size. Now, a little bit of a word about changing the scale. You just go edit, transform, scale. However, it's very easy to mess up the aspect ratio and accidentally distort the image. So what you do is whenever you're changing the scale of something using the transform tool, you hold down the shift key as you're transforming it, and it will keep the aspect ratio the same. So the way you figure out the size is you look at the objects around it. I was trying to figure out, my daughter and my dad are next to the car. So what size do they need to be able to drive in that car? And that's how I figured out the size. Now I'm going to go image, adjustment, black and white. And once I've made them black and white, I've now decided they're too sharp for the background. So what I'm going to do is I'm using the filter tool to add noise. So I'm actually lowering the quality of that layer where my daughter and my dad are by adding noise. So it's going to become a little bit less sharp, a little more pixelated. And once I've done that, I'm going to actually go back to the background layer and do the same thing to try and get them to match each other as closely as possible. So again, you just have to eyeball it. When you think it looks right, you go to the background layer and you do the exact same thing. Until the images appear to match. And then the next thing I have to worry about is actually the light and shadows. I took the background and I made it black and white as well, just in case there was any little bit of color in it. I wanted it to have the same color range as the foreground. So now I'm making it more pixelated, adding noise to the background so that everything appears to match. And now I'm going to worry about the lighting. The best way to do lighting is still using the burn and dodge tool. The burn tool will make it darker, the dodge tool will make it lighter. We used the burn and dodge tool before when we did the faces on Fruitless, and so you guys know how to do it. But there are other ways to do lighting, which I'm going to show you guys, just so you can play around with it. You want the lighting in the photo to match the photo that you're putting it in the background of, or else it's gonna look wrong. People are gonna know immediately that it's collaged in. So the best way to fool people is to make the lighting match. So look at the directions of the shadows, figure out where the sun is coming from, if they're cast shadows on the ground, if there's, lighting on people's faces or lighting on fence posts, anything like that. As you can see, I'm also playing around with scale, seeing how the figures would look in the foreground as opposed to the background, changing their size to make them look right in different parts of the picture. The cast shadows on the ground are going to become very important later because without them, the figures actually look like they're floating and not grounded in the picture. And lighting. Here are the different ways to do lighting. I'm going to use lighting effects. Just click Filter, Render, and then Lighting Effects. It basically puts these little lights into the picture and allows you to adjust what direction the light is hitting the figures. So it'll only affect the lighting in that layer. It's not going to affect the lighting in the background. What you're trying to do is make the lighting in your subject layer match the lighting in your background layer. So I'm just playing around with that. I ultimately ended up using the burn and dodge tool, especially for the cast shadows on the ground. Just using that burn tool and drawing on the ground made the ground automatically darker. I just do want you to be aware that there are other ways to play around with lighting in Photoshop. So once I have my image just the way I want it, I have to worry about the cast shadows on the ground. You just use the burn tool to draw horizontally across the ground and you'll get those cast shadows. And then you can use the dodge tool a little bit on the figures to add a few highlights. And it's important not to overdo it. When you save this image, you're going to save it as Time Machine. You're going to save it as a PSD file, but I also want you to resize it so that the width is about 8 inches and the height is about 10 inches. And then I want you to save it as a PNG, portable network graphic. And then I want you to upload it to Google Classroom. Please make sure you resize it only at the very end. And do resize it before you upload it into Google Classroom, because I don't want a file that's 40 inches wide. This is Mrs. Wintenberg, the Helpful Art Teacher, showing you how to go back in time.